The bell tolled noon, sharp and merciless. Dust swirled across the town square of Ash Hollow as men in boots and women in bonnets crowded near the wooden platform. Sunlight beat down hard, glinting off the sheriff's badge, the polished shoes of the judge, and the coins jangling in waiting hands. At the center of it all stood Clara Hayes, a widow in a faded calico dress, clutching her small boy tight against her skirts. Samuel pressed his face into her hip, trembling. His little shoes were scuffed, laces frayed. His mother's knuckles were white where she held him. On the block behind them, her meager belongings were stacked for all to see. Cracked pots, a Bible with torn pages, a rocking chair worn smooth by years of use. The sheriff called out bids with a booming voice, each strike of the gavel cutting into Clara's chest. $2 for the chair. Sold. 50 cents for the skillet. Sold. Each item stripped away a piece of her husband's memory, her family's dignity, her child's inheritance. The crowd jeered in low whispers. She's cursed. Her husband drank himself into the grave. That boy ought to be raised proper, without her. Clara's face burned, but she stood straight, her eyes dry though her heart broke. She would not give them the pleasure of seeing her weep. Then the judge's voice rang out above the crowd. The debts remain unpaid. The court rules the boy, he pointed his gavel at Samuel, shall be placed in state custody until proper guardianship is found. For a heartbeat, the world went silent. Then Clara fell to her knees, clutching Samuel as if they meant to rip him from her very flesh. Her cry split the square. Please, don't take my child away. He's all I have. The deputies stepped forward, boots grinding dust, hands reaching. Samuel sobbed, burying his face in her shoulder. Clara's hair tumbled loose, veil falling, her dignity stripped in front of every gossiping tongue. Laughter rippled cruelly from the back of the crowd. Best the boy be raised clean. She's nothing but a beggar now. Clara pressed Samuel tighter, her nails biting into her own skin. She whispered into his ear, I won't let them. I swear it. But her arms felt weak against the law's grasp. Then a shadow moved. From the far edge of the crowd, a man stepped forward. Ethan Cole. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in plain black with dust on his boots. His face was hard as carved stone, his eyes hidden beneath the brim of a hat. He walked slow, each step cutting the murmurs around him into silence. The deputies paused. Ethan stopped just short of the platform, lifting one hand. His voice was low, gravelly, yet it carried. I'll pay the debt. The words struck like a gunshot. The crowd gasped. The sheriff narrowed his eyes. You'll do what? Ethan reached into his coat, pulled free a leather pouch, and let silver coins spill into his palm. Sunlight caught the glint. Her debt's mine now. For a moment no one moved. The weight of his voice, the steadiness of his hand, made it undeniable. The judge's gavel trembled. Cole, this is irregular. Ethan's gaze lifted, steady as stone. So's tearing a boy from his mother. Whispers flared through the crowd. That's Ethan Cole, the rancher who lives alone. They say he lost a wife. They say worse. Clara looked up, her tear-stained face catching sight of him for the first time. His eyes, weather-beaten and cold, met hers. They held no pity, only something deeper. A grief she recognized, though she could not name it. The sheriff spat into the dirt. You're making a fool's bargain, Cole. Ethan closed his fist around the silver. I've made worse. Samuel peeked from behind his mother's skirts, small eyes locked on the man who had stepped between him and the law. Something in Ethan's silence drew the boy's trembling hand to the hem of his coat. He gripped it, as if he already knew. The square grew still. Every face waited, wondering, why would this man risk his name and fortune for a stranger's child? Clara's breath shook. She whispered, more to herself than to him, why? But Ethan gave no answer. Only that steady, unbroken gaze, as if he were staking more than money on the moment. The widow's heart flickered with something she had nearly lost, hope. The gavel had not yet fallen. The law had not yet yielded, and the question hung in the dust-filled air. The coins clattered into the sheriff's palm, each one ringing louder than the last. The jeers quieted, swallowed by the weight of silver and the silent authority of the man who had offered it. Ethan Cole's hand fell back to his side, steady as stone. The sheriff scowled, turning the coins over like they carried poison. Around him, whispers rose again, sharp, venomous, hungry. Cole's mad. He'll regret this. Man's haunted. Mark my words. Clara Hayes stood frozen, her arms tight around Samuel. Gratitude and suspicion wrestled in her chest. What kind of man spent so freely, so recklessly on a stranger's child? She wanted to thank him, but the words tangled in her throat. Samuel pressed closer to Ethan's dark coat, small fingers catching the fabric. His fear quieted. For the boy, the rancher's silence was safer than the crowd's cruelty. The sheriff's lip curled. Cole, you defy the court. The law may take her debt, but the town will see it different. You've bound yourself to this woman's name and her shame. The judge cleared his throat, uneasy, but said nothing. The murmurs spread like fire. The widow had been claimed, they whispered. Not by law, not by love, but by the will of a man dangerous enough to silence the square. Clara's cheeks burned. She did not belong to Ethan Cole. No man owned her. Yet she could already feel the weight of gossip settling on her shoulders like chains. Ethan's jaw tightened, but his voice remained level. Come, that single word cut the air clean. He turned, unbothered by the stares, and strode toward the edge of the square. For a moment, Clara did not move. The crowd closed in behind her, hungry for the sight of her falter. Then Samuel tugged her hand, his eyes fixed on Ethan's broad back. Without thinking, Clara followed. The crowd parted, some glaring, some smirking. Clara kept her chin high, though her legs trembled. Her few possessions, what hadn't been sold, were tied in a rough bundle. Ethan took them without asking and strapped them to his horse. He lifted Samuel into the saddle, the boy wide-eyed but trusting. Clara climbed up behind, clutching her son, the rancher walking beside the reins. They left Ash Hollow as the sun sagged low, painting the sky in bruised reds and deepening gold. Dust clung to Clara's skirts. The air smelled of dry earth and old wood smoke. Her heart pounded with every step of the horse. Relief pressed against fear. Samuel was safe, yet she did not know into whose hands she had placed him. Ethan Cole spoke nothing, offered no explanation, only his silence and the slow, steady rhythm of his stride. Behind them, the town square buzzed with fresh gossip. Ahead stretched the wide prairie, endless and uncertain. Clara dared to study the man who had upended her fate. His shoulders were broad but stooped, as if carrying a weight older than her grief. His face was shadowed by the brim of his hat, unreadable. He had the look of someone who had stared down loss and built walls against it. Her chest tightened. Gratitude whispered that he had saved her boy. Suspicion reminded her that no one, especially no man, gave without reason. The road stretched on. Samuel, weary from tears, leaned against her, already drifting into sleep. Clara brushed his hair back, her voice low in prayer. She glanced once more at Ethan. A stranger had rescued them, but was he savior or something far more dangerous? The prairie wind answered with silence, carrying only the cry of a hawk across the horizon. And as the sun slipped lower, every step away from Ash Hollow felt like crossing into a life she no longer recognized. The prairie stretched for miles, swallowing the last light of day. Clara clutched Samuel close as Ethan Cole led his horse off the main trail and through a stand of wind-worn cottonwoods. Beyond the trees, a ranch appeared, lonely, vast, and scarred by neglect. The fences leaned, posts half broken. The barn roof sagged, one side patched with mismatched boards. Cattle stirred somewhere in the dark, their lowing soft and restless. The house itself stood tall but weathered, shutters crooked. Its paint long since surrendered to sun and storms. It looked empty, and somehow, it looked like him. Ethan tied the horse near the barn and carried Clara's bundle of belongings inside without a word. Clara followed, Samuel in her arms, the wooden steps creaking under her boots. The door swung open on a house bare but sturdy. The air smelled of old wood and cooled ash from a fireplace that hadn't burned in days. Dust lingered on shelves. A single table sat square in the middle of the room, chairs mismatched as if borrowed from forgotten places. Samuel wriggled down, exploring with the unafraid curiosity of a child. Clara set their bundle near the wall and stood uncertain, her hands folded in front of her. She waited for instruction, for explanation, but Ethan simply moved past her, striking flint to light a lantern. The glow spread across the room, throwing shadows long and sharp. He went about the work of supper without speaking. Salt pork, hard bread, beans simmered low in a blackened pot. His movements were practiced, steady, as if he had done this routine 1,000 times alone. He asked nothing of her, demanded no thanks, and his silence filled the house more than words could. Clara knelt to help Samuel wash up, using water poured from a heavy jug. She brushed his hair with her fingers, whispering comfort against his temple. He was safe, she told herself. Safe for now, yet the weight of unease sat heavy in her chest. After Samuel's hunger was eased and his small body curled against hers, Clara found herself sitting near the fire. The flames cracked softly, throwing warmth across the barren room. Ethan sat in a chair opposite, broad shoulders bent slightly forward, eyes fixed on the blaze. He did not look at her, but his presence was impossible to ignore. He seemed watchful, protective, not with hunger or claim, but with something quieter, something sorrowful. When the silence grew too deep, he finally spoke. His voice was low, gravelly, meant for truth, not conversation. You'll be safe here, that was all. No promises, no explanations, just the steady certainty of a man who had decided it so. Clara nodded, though her thoughts swirled. Was he rescuing her out of kindness? Out of guilt? Or was there some wound inside him that demanded he shield another from pain? She could not tell. Samuel stirred in her lap, his small hand reaching toward the mantel. His fingers found something hidden in dust, a small carved bird, its wings spread, the wood worn smooth by touch. He placed it into his mother's hands, proud of his discovery. Clara turned it over in her palm, surprised at the care in its carving. It felt alive somehow, as if it had been held close for years. She looked to Ethan, expecting explanation. He had seen. His gaze flickered toward the bird, then away again. His jaw tightened, but he said nothing. The fire popped, sparks rising into the chimney. The house creaked, as if remembering lives long gone. Clara stared at the bird, heart tightening. What story lived inside this fragile thing? And why did the silent rancher guard it so fiercely, yet refuse to speak? The answer lingered in shadows, unspoken. Life at the ranch settled into a rhythm both harsh and strangely steady. Ethan rose before first light, the scrape of boots and the swing of an axe marking the dawn. He worked the land without complaint, splitting logs, hauling water, mending the corral. His movements were sharp, efficient, shaped by years of labor and solitude. Yet when Samuel followed him, dragging a stick through the dirt, Ethan slowed his pace. "Watch close," he said, voice rough but patient. He placed the boy's small hands on the haft of the axe, guiding him in the motion of a swing. The blade bit shallow, but Samuel grinned. Ethan's mouth twitched, almost a smile. Clara watched from the porch, sewing torn cloth into makeshift curtains. The house still felt hollow, but with each stitch, each scrap of fabric softening the bare wood, it became a place that hinted at warmth. She found herself humming under her breath, something she hadn't done since before her husband's death. Ethan carried his silence like armor, yet it began to crack in small, unexpected ways. He repaired Samuel's worn shoes one evening, setting them by the hearth without a word. Another morning, Clara found a pitcher of fresh water waiting by her door, dew still clinging to the rim. When a section of fence split under wind, it was already mended before she could mention it. He never asked for thanks. His care lived in actions, not words. Still, the outside world had not forgotten her shame. Neighbors rode by on horseback, slowing just enough to let their voices carry. Looks. Like Cole finally took himself a woman. Poor. Widow didn't waste time. She'll pay the price for tying herself to him. Clara's face burned with humiliation. Their laughter stung like nettles. She turned away, clutching her son close, wishing the ground would swallow her. But Ethan only stood straighter, eyes hard, shoulders unmoving. When she dared meet his gaze, he said quietly, "Let them talk." The words, simple as they were, struck deep. He did not rise to anger, did not defend his name. He dismissed them entirely, as if their poison could never touch him. Clara envied that strength, even as it baffled her. Days stretched into weeks. Slowly, the walls around her heart loosened. Ethan never crossed boundaries, never demanded what wasn't his. Yet his presence filled the ranch, steady, protective, unyielding. One night, as Samuel curled in his blankets, he whispered against her shoulder, "He looks after us, Mama." Clara kissed his hair, her throat tightening. "Yes, he does." But the words frightened her as much as they comforted her. Dependence was a dangerous thing. Gratitude could turn into trust, and trust into something she dared not name. Later, when the house fell silent, Clara lingered by the window. The moon cast pale light across the yard, silvering the fields and barn. She wondered what lay hidden behind Ethan Cole's silence. What grief, what memory, what wound he nursed alone. The answer came in a gesture, not in words. As she blew out the lantern, a faint sound made her turn. On the sill, just inside the open window, lay the wooden bird. Ethan must have placed it there quietly, after she had tucked Samuel in. Its carved wings caught the moonlight, the edges smoothed by years of touch. Clara picked it up, her heart aching with questions. Why share this token now? What story did it carry from his past? She glanced toward the yard, half expecting to see him in the shadows. But there was nothing, only the hush of the prairie wind and the lonely creak of the barn door. She closed her hand around the bird, wondering what weight she now carried with it. The sky darkened like iron. Rain pelted the roof of the ranch, hammering against worn shingles, seeping through cracked boards. Water ran in thin streams down walls, pooling in low corners. The wind rattled windows and shook the doors, carrying with it the scent of wet earth and ozone. Clara clutched Samuel closer, rocking him in her arms as his little teeth chattered. The boy trembled, shivering despite thick blankets. She pressed her face into his hair, whispering nonsense lullabies to calm both of them, her own heart thundering in tandem with the storm. The roof groaned, a long, hollow cry that made her stomach twist. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the bare room in brief. White flashes, and then, at the door, he appeared. Ethan Cole. He stood for a moment in the doorway, dripping with rain, shoulders broad and shadowed. In his hands, he held more blankets. No words came, only a slow, deliberate motion of setting them over Samuel and Clara. He crouched beside them, his presence steady, unyielding, a wall against the fury outside. Clara's pulse slowed despite the storm. For the first time in months, perhaps years, she felt no fear. The quiet strength of him, the unspoken promise in his posture, wrapped around her and her son tighter than any quilt. Thunder shook the house, rattling the beams. But within the circle of his watchful shadow, there was calm. Samuel burrowed into her, whispering, "He's not leaving us, is he, Mama?" "No," she murmured, brushing rain-matted hair from his forehead. "He's not leaving." Days passed, and the fragile threads of trust began to weave themselves. Samuel laughed again, small but genuine, chasing hens across the yard or helping Ethan haul firewood. Clara dared to hum old lullabies while tending the kitchen, the sound carrying lightly through the empty rooms. Ethan, still mostly silent, began letting little gestures of care speak for him. The tools he repaired sat neatly in order. Fresh water appeared on the table in the morning. A broken gate hinge was mended before Clara had a chance to worry. Each act, small, precise, meaningful. One evening, after the storm had passed, Samuel curled on the floor near the hearth. Ethan settled onto a chair beside him, the flickering fire casting shadows across his face. The boy's wide eyes found him, and in a voice low and rough, Ethan spoke. "This bird," he said, nodding toward the small wooden carving Samuel held, "was my daughter's. I carved it for her before she—" His voice caught trembling. "Before she died of fever." Clara froze, her breath caught in her throat. The firelight painted the lines of grief etched deep into Ethan's face. Her heart broke for him, for the life he had lost, for the silence he carried. He realized she had overheard and turned away, shoulders stiff, ashamed of letting his raw grief show. But Clara did not recoil. She stepped closer, her voice soft, steady. "Your silence speaks, but we hear it," she said. Ethan's hand twitched at his side. He did not meet her eyes, but for the first time he allowed the smallest tremor of relief to pass through him. The boy nestled between them, his little hands clutching the bird. For a moment, the three of them sat in quiet company, a fragile family bound by trust, newly earned, yet still tentative. Outside, the prairie whispered of danger yet to come. Rumors from town, old grudges and prying eyes had not vanished. They would arrive like storm clouds once more, and Clara's heart knew it. For now, though, they were safe. For now, trust had taken root, and the carved bird sat between them. A small talisman of loss, love, and the promise that perhaps some wounds could be shared without breaking. The morning air was thick with sun and dust when the riders appeared on the horizon. Clara, tending the garden, felt her stomach tighten. Something in their gait, in the sharp glint of badges and rifles, set her heart racing. Samuel clung to her side, small hands gripping the hem of her dress. Ethan stood a few steps behind her, hands resting on the worn leather of his belt. He did not move forward, did not speak. The tension in his frame was palpable, as if he had been waiting for this moment long before it arrived. The sheriff dismounted first, boots crunching on gravel. Behind him, the judge and 2 deputies followed. Their faces were hard, eyes cold. "Ethan Cole," the sheriff barked, voice carrying over the yard. "The court finds your payment for the Hayes debt unlawful. That boy belongs to the state. You've no claim here," Clara gasped, feeling the ground shift beneath her. Samuel tugged at her skirt. "Mama?" She pressed him closer, but the trembling in her chest betrayed her. The sheriff's gaze swept the yard. "You've defied the law once, Cole. Make no mistake. You will not escape the consequences." Ethan's jaw tightened. He said nothing. His hands clenched and unclenched, as if weighing his next move in silence. And then, the sheriff leaned in, voice low but venomous. "You've always been a killer. Cole, remember the man you killed here years ago? Acquitted, yes, but the town never forgave you." "And they never will," Clara froze. Her mind spun. Did she? Did she place her son in the hands of a murderer? Her arms felt suddenly weak. Samuel looked up at her with wide, trusting eyes, unaware of the danger she had never anticipated. Ethan's voice, when it came, was low and rough, nearly swallowed by the wind. "Yes, I killed." Clara's pulse leapt, but she did not step back. Her heart thudded against her ribs, eyes locked on the man who had saved them from the auction block. "I killed to protect my wife and daughter," he said. His voice cracked, betraying the weight he had carried silently for years. "They died anyway. Fever took them, this—" He touched the carved wooden bird Samuel held, worn smooth by small fingers. "Is all that remains." Tears sprang unbidden to Clara's eyes. The rage of the sheriff and the condemnation of the judge did not matter. She saw only the raw grief, the solitude, the love that had cost him everything. She swallowed hard, stepping closer, her hands clasped over her chest. "You saved him." "You saved Samuel," she whispered, voice breaking. "And yet the town calls you danger, but I—" Paused, her breath catching. "I know you're more than what they say." Ethan's shoulders sagged slightly. He had offered no excuses, no defenses. His silence, until now, had been his shield. But now, facing the threat once more, he allowed the truth to stand unhidden. The sheriff spat into the dirt. "Your words won't save him. You'll hand over the boy, Cole, or the law will take what's ours." Clara trembled. The wind whipped dust into her eyes, stinging. Her mind raced. Her son's life, the fragile peace they had begun to build, the man who had taken them under his protection. Could she trust him? Could she trust herself to believe in a man branded a killer by gossip, fear, and history? Samuel tugged at her sleeve. "Mama, he won't let them take me, right?" Clara's heart ached. She lifted him, holding him close. "No, Samuel. No one will take you." She looked toward Ethan, who remained steady, silent, a wall against the threat. The carved bird rested between them, small and powerful, a reminder of love lost and lives fiercely protected. The sheriff and judge exchanged glances, impatience and contempt etched into their faces. Time was short, and the law would not wait. Clara drew a deep breath, squaring her shoulders. Fear licked at her mind, but the truth she felt in her chest was stronger. Ethan had saved her son once, risking his name, his life, his reputation. Could she believe in him again? Could she step past the stories, past the town's judgment, and trust the man who had quietly carried the weight of his own past? The prairie wind rose, rattling the barn, tugging at loose boards. Danger was closing in, relentless and uncompromising. But in the center of the storm, one thing was clear. She had a choice to make, and she would make it with her heart. The night air carried the metallic scent of rain and iron. Clara's eyes widened as hoofbeats pounded against the gravel outside the ranch. Samuel clung to her skirts, small fingers curling around the carved bird. His chest rose and fell in shallow breaths, matching her own rapid heartbeat. The sheriff rode up first, lantern swinging from the saddle, deputies close behind. Their boots struck the wooden porch with heavy authority, echoing across the empty yard. "Hand over the boy," the sheriff demanded, voice sharp enough to cut through the wind. "The court has ruled." "You have no claim here, Hayes, and you," spat the words toward Ethan, "stand in the way of justice at your peril." Clara straightened, shoulders tense but resolute. "He is my son," she said, voice trembling yet fierce, "and he is not going anywhere." The deputies shifted, rifles leaning against saddles, hands resting on triggers. The neighbors had begun gathering beyond the fence line, whispers spreading like wildfire. Some gazed with curiosity, others with thinly veiled disdain. Many remembered the stories. The man who had killed in this town, the widow now claimed by him. Ethan stepped forward, shoulders broad in the lantern light, a shadow against the rising storm. The shotgun in his hands gleamed faintly, old but cared for. His eyes, calm yet dangerous, scanned the group. He said nothing. His silence spoke louder than the sheriff's threats, more terrifying than any gunshot could. Samuel clutched Clara's skirts tighter, pressing his face to the folds of her dress. The carved bird rested against his small hand, a talisman of protection and perhaps of hope. Clara brushed his hair back, murmuring, "Stay close. Be brave." The sheriff's jaw tightened. "You don't understand, Hayes. This isn't just about the boy. It's about Cole. He has haunted this town long enough. I aim to see him broken." Clara's stomach dropped. The truth hit her with cold clarity. The law's fury was personal. The injustice that had branded Ethan years ago had never left him. This was not simply about custody. It was about humiliation, vengeance, and the town's endless appetite for retribution. Ethan shifted, his stance unyielding. But the flicker of the fire in the porch lantern revealed a weight behind his eyes. Years of solitude, loss, and unspoken grief now gathered in quiet resolve. Night deepened, lightning splitting the sky and casting momentary stark shadows across the yard. Thunder rattled the roof, echoing the tension that coiled tight around the house. Later, when the sheriff and deputies withdrew to plan a dawn return, Clara found Ethan standing alone outside. The prairie stretched endless and black around him, wind tugging at his coat and hat. She approached softly, her voice barely carrying over the whispering grass. "You saved us once," she said, hesitant yet full of meaning. "Can you do it again?" Ethan did not turn. The silence answered her question. His jaw set, eyes fixed on the horizon, a man ready to meet the coming storm. No words were necessary. His commitment, his willingness to defend them, radiated like heat from a forge. Clara placed a hand on his arm, fleeting, tentative. Samuel slept fitfully inside, unaware of the planning and danger that edged closer with every minute. She thought of the carved bird in his hand, its wings open, a small emblem of courage. The neighbors murmured in the distance, some moving closer to watch, some retreating in fear. The storm above matched the tension in the yard, rolling clouds threatening rain, wind whipping dust across the fence line. Clara felt the enormity of what was coming. At dawn, the sheriff would return with more men, their numbers greater, their intent relentless. The ranch, this home they had begun to claim, was vulnerable. And yet, in the quiet of the night, she felt the strength of the man beside her. He did not need her words to understand. He had always been ready to shoulder what others could not. He had faced judgment, loss, and death before, and he would do so again if it meant protecting the boy, and perhaps the fragile family they had begun to form. The prairie moaned in the wind. Somewhere a distant coyote cried. The world waited with bated breath, and Clara knew that survival would demand sacrifice, courage, and trust unlike any she had ever known. At the edge of darkness, Ethan remained a silent sentinel, eyes fixed on the horizon, shotgun at his side. The storm inside and out was coming, and they would face it together. Sunrise struck the prairie like fire. Dust rose in thick waves as the sheriff and his deputies crested the hill, rifles glinting in the pale light. Their horses snorted and pawed the earth, impatient and tense. Clara pressed Samuel to her chest, eyes wide, heart hammering. The carved bird rested in his small hand, wings worn smooth, a talisman against fear. Ethan stepped into the open yard, rifle cradled in his arms. His shoulders were squared, stance wide and unflinching. The rising sun cast long shadows across his weathered face, highlighting the lines etched by loss, silence, and grief. He was a sentinel, a single wall between the boy and the law, and the weight of it pressed against the prairie air. The sheriff's voice cut through the still morning. "Cole, step aside! The law demands the boy." Ethan's jaw tightened, eyes narrowing. "No, he stays." "You know nothing of him or me." The sheriff spat into the dust, rage curling like smoke around his boots. "You'll pay for your arrogance." A tense silence stretched across the yard. Then, sharp, abrupt, the first shot cracked. Gunfire erupted, echoing across the hills, bouncing off the barn, the fences, and the dry prairie grass. Horses whinnied and bolted, hooves pounding the ground in panic. Clara ducked instinctively behind the post of the porch. Samuel pressed to her chest. Ethan returned fire, deliberate and precise, one hand steady on the rifle despite the chaos. Bullets tore through the air, striking the barn, splintering wood, ripping dust and smoke into the dawn. A sharp pain tore through Ethan's shoulder. He stumbled, but did not fall. He gritted his teeth. The taste of iron sharp in his mouth and pressed on, one arm still raised, rifle aimed, protecting the boy and the woman who had become the center of his world. Clara's hands shook, but her resolve hardened. She lifted a rifle herself, shoulder braced against the morning light, finger finding the trigger. Her aim was unsteady but true, and each shot was a declaration. Her child would not be taken. She would not allow injustice to claim another life. The fight raged, gunfire echoing like thunder across the rolling hills. Dust and smoke swirled around them, making every movement a calculated risk. Ethan's strength never wavered, though crimson soaked through his shirt, marking the cost he bore silently. Gradually, the tide turned. The deputies faltered, their morale cracking under the relentless defense. Some ducked behind fences, others dismounted and scattered, unwilling to die for a law that demanded cruelty over justice. The sheriff, seeing his men crumble, clenched his jaw, spit cursing words into the dust, then wheeled his horse and rode back toward town. His hatred lingered, sharp and bitter, but defeat held him in check. The prairie fell silent except for the wind, the scattered whinnies of horses, and the distant cry of a hawk circling overhead. Smoke drifted in thin gray sheets, carrying the scent of gunpowder and scorched earth. Clara rushed to Ethan, dropping to her knees beside him. Her hands pressed against the blood soaking his shirt, warmth and fear intertwining as she cradled his head. Samuel peered from behind her shoulder, wide-eyed and trembling, clutching the carved bird as if it could protect them all. Ethan's eyes met hers, pain etched into every line, but also release. A slow exhale escaped his lips, his grip on the rifle finally loosening. He had survived, but barely, and the weight of the past, the town and the law had been borne with him in silence. "Clara," his voice rasped, low, vulnerable, almost lost beneath the wind. She pressed her forehead to his, whispering, "You're alive. You saved him. You saved us." He allowed a shuddering breath to escape, eyes fluttering closed, leaning into her warmth. The boy stirred, small hands brushing the blood from Ethan's sleeve. Tentative and innocent, as if offering forgiveness and trust all at once. Around them, the prairie seemed to exhale, the threat broken, the storm spent. Dust settled. The sun climbed higher, casting light over a landscape that had witnessed justice wrestled from lawless hands and a man who bore his scars with quiet dignity. Clara held him tighter, heart pounding. Samuel leaned against them both, small and unafraid now. The carved bird lay between them on the porch. Wings open to the sky, a symbol of loss, protection, and the fragile hope that had carried them through fire and blood. In the silence that followed, only one question remained unspoken. Would Ethan survive to see the fragile family he had saved, grow into a life worth living, and claim the happiness he had denied himself for so long? Weeks had passed since the gunfire had ended, since dust and smoke had cleared the prairie around the ranch. The sun rose over gentle hills, casting a golden glow across fields that had once seemed barren and unforgiving. Clara moved among her small garden, hands deep in the warm, loose soil. Seeds sprouted green against the brown earth, tiny miracles after long months of hardship. The scent of damp earth and early blossoms carried on the morning breeze, gentle, promising. Samuel ran across the yard, a scrap of wood in one hand, carving it with his small knife into shapes of birds and horses. His laughter rang across the open fields, light and unburdened, lifting something from Clara's chest she hadn't realized had been weighed down for years. Ethan sat on the porch, Rifle long stowed, his shirt cleaned and patched where blood had once soaked it. He rested one hand on the rail, the other holding the small wooden bird. The original, worn smooth by hands too small and memories too sharp. His eyes followed Samuel's movements, noting each hesitant stroke of the knife, the way the boy's brow furrowed in concentration. The clumsy lines of the new bird were beautiful in their imperfection, filled with life rather than sorrow. Clara approached, brushing the garden soil from her hands. She sat beside him, letting her fingers touch his as naturally as breathing. Ethan's hand accepted hers without a word. Silence fell around them, but it was no longer the hollow kind. It was warm, steady, full of possibility. Samuel looked up, holding his carved bird proudly.
"Mama, look!"
"Just like yours." Clara smiled, cheeks lifting, and glanced at Ethan. He nodded, eyes soft but steady. "It's good," he said. "Better than I could have done at your age." The three of them remained on the porch for long minutes, watching the wind move through the prairie grass, listening to the soft creak of the barn, and feeling the quiet pulse of life returning to the ranch. Every shadow, every crack in the fence, seemed less like a scar and more like a story of survival. Clara picked up the original carved bird, tracing its wings with a fingertip. It no longer carried the weight of loss. Each line of carved wood seemed to breathe anew. Samuel leaned against her side, eyes wide, and Ethan's hand brushed against hers again, grounding her in the moment, in this fragile, earned peace. She whispered to Ethan, voice low, almost reverent. "It's ours now. Everything we've fought for." He did not speak, only squeezed her hand lightly. His eyes drifted over Samuel, the yard, the horizon beyond. For the first time in years, there was no shadow pressing him down. The camera of the story, the mind's eye, pulled back slowly. The ranch no longer felt haunted. The wind carried laughter instead of whispers. The barn, the fences, even the sagging porch seemed alive, imbued with the pulse of a family that had been pieced together not by law or blood, but by sacrifice, courage, and love. The bird rested on the windowsill once more. Sunlight struck it, glinting along carved wings. It had been a relic of grief, a symbol of what had been lost, yet now it signified rebirth. Samuel's new birds scattered across the porch and yard, awkward and bright, each one a small testament to life reclaimed. Clara leaned her head against Ethan's shoulder, and he finally let himself exhale fully, the weight of years lifting with the morning air. Samuel ran to them, handing them his newest creation. The three of them laughed softly, a sound that filled the open sky, carried across the prairie, and settled into the ranch like a promise fulfilled. The bird, both old and new, stood witness to a family made whole by courage, by trust, and by the quiet, unshakable devotion of a man who had risked everything. And in the light of the rising sun, the ranch no longer belonged to sorrow or shadow. It belonged to them, a family forged from ashes, laughter, and carved wings.